Well, unlike many pundits and members of the media, veteran political analyst Mark Halperin predicted President-elect Trump would prevail over VP Harris. Now the liberal media are gearing up to cover a second Trump presidency. He says they're going to have a tough time.
You have to respect the fact that tens of millions of people are going to vote for him, and you have to be prepared for that. And some people listened to me, but most of them didn't. And, of course, it's particularly exacerbated by what I call the dominant media, which creates this fantasy world. All these things add up to a blue bubble that they just can't see. Most people on the left, if you say, why do people like Donald Trump? They're paralyzed. They can't answer the question. For some reason, they can't appreciate that tens of millions of their fellow countrymen and women feel differently than they do.
Someone who apparently understands those tens of millions of Americans, the mayor of Dallas, Texas, Eric Johnson, penned an op-ed titled, "My switch to the GOP last year should have been a wake-up call for Democrats." He told this to Fox.
I didn't think I was going to be some anomaly that everyone needed to worry about. I thought that I was going to be a harbinger of things to come. All the things that people have been asking for generations from our cities that have been under Democratic leadership that have failed to deliver on those things.
Our power panel, Leslie Marshall, Fox News contributor, and Jessica Patterson, chairwoman of the California Republican Party. Welcome to you both. So, Leslie, I'll ask you the question to Mark's point. Why do people like Donald Trump? Can you answer that?
Yes, I can, and many Democrats do, and I don't know what rock Mark's living under, with all due respect. Look, less than half the people in this country voted, and about half of them voted for Donald Trump, and about half of them voted for Kamala Harris. And we've seen that cycle after cycle, every 2 years, every 4 years, Sandra. That is where our country is at. We are divided. Why do people like Donald Trump? Some people like him being a former businessman and the economic gains they think they have, or that they felt better with him as president with the economy. Some people who are concerned about crime or immigration feel that he'll be different and feel he'll be tougher in crime and immigration than Joe Biden or Democrats or Kamala Harris. I mean, there are a plethora of reasons why people like Donald Trump, plethora of reasons why they don't. But this is not some huge, rocket scientist class that we need to take at MIT. Elections have consequences. One wins, one loses. And the loser always says, what do I need to do differently next time?
Well, I don't think you can accuse him of living under a rock. I think it is a difficult question for so many on the left who are not looking within to find out what happened and what they got wrong here. Jessica, when it comes to Donald Trump, I'm looking forward to Thanksgiving this Thursday, and I'm thinking there are going to be conversations on dinner tables everywhere, all over this country. And there does seem to be those folks who have a tough time understanding how someone, even in their own family, can feel differently than they do.
Absolutely. It's pretty amazing how Democrats and their allies in the liberal media have kept their head in the sand. They wanted this election to be about issues that they believed that they had the upper hand on, when in reality, people were mostly taking into consideration what was happening at the grocery store and the gas station. Even 20 days later, we're seeing in the media the outrage that Joe and Mika would go and meet with President Trump, the daily meltdowns that were happening on The View every day, or watching, just individuals go to their TikToks and their Instagram stories. I don't think any of this is helping people get to a place where they can look back and say, what could we have done differently?
It's a good point. Leslie, Democrats are looking to dig out of this depression after their election drubbing may have a long road ahead of them. Many asking, what went so wrong? So how do we fix it? Should be the question. Who is our party's leader now? Congressman Adam Schiff with some introspection, but also softening the blow for the president.
I think the entire Democratic Party bears a responsibility, myself included, and the former president, and mounted an effective campaign, and you have to give him credit for that. Our party became associated with the status quo, and that was too much to overcome.
DNC Chairman Jamie Harrison is calling it quits. Two Democratic strategists say the election for a new chair could mean a seismic shift for the party. One quote, there's a lot of resentment right now directed at the kind of old guard. Politically, when it comes to messaging and outreach, there needs to be some serious changes, a changing of the guard. Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger argues that change should look like this. Democrats need to not ever use the word socialist or socialism ever again. People think it doesn't matter, but it does matter, and we lost good members because of it. Senator-elect Alyssa Slotkin says, quote, I personally think that identity politics needs to go the way of the dodo. One Wall Street Journal columnist doesn't see much hope for that. Her piece titled Gavin Newsom and the Democrats' Delusional Recovery. They know they have a political problem, but their solution is to pour another shot of progressive policy. So will there be lessons learned here, Leslie?
Of course, there are lessons learned. Look, I think we're going to see a very different, not just Democratic Party, but I think we're going to see a very different outcome in the midterms. I should say so different because Democrats have flipped quite a few seats in the House, and I think we'll see that going into the midterms. Like I said, whether it's the economy or whether it's a political election, it's cyclical. In 2008, Republicans had a come-to-Jesus moment with their party. In 2024, right now, Democrats are having the same, and they should. I think it's important. Look, I always tell my kids, Sandra, you know, if somebody comes home and they didn't do well on a test, you know, you can play the blame game, but that's not really productive. And I've put that out there in social media to Congress people like Torres and others. It's good to look back in the sense that what did we do wrong and what could we do differently? But it's very important to move forward. And, you know, pointing fingers of blame, just not productive. It doesn't help moving forward and doesn't help make the change that obviously our party needs to bring about.
Jessica, do you believe that there will be some real changes on the part of Democrats in their party after this?
Well, it'll be certainly interesting to watch, especially with the election of the new DNC chair. Which direction does the party decide to go on? Because we're seeing these progressive or regressive governors all over the country, like Gavin Newsom, who are doubling down on their failed efforts. Even in deep blue California, we saw a shift of 72% of counties move towards Trump in this election cycle, and he was running against a California Democrat. We saw London Breed, who was ousted. We saw a liberal DA in Los Angeles who was ousted. So this is really interesting to watch if the party goes in that direction and then what their candidates end up doing as well.
Well, there's a lot of work to do for both parties, the incoming administration and, of course, Democrats, to look back at what happened. Pleasure to have you both on. I mean, we have the two turkeys have been pardoned. I believe Peach and Blossom. That is officially done now at the White House. And Leslie, great to see you. Jessica, great to see you as well. Happy Thanksgiving to you both.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.